Hello friends, welcome to the channel. The knockout quarterfinal phase of the Skilling Open started yesterday. These 8 players battled it out intensely on the day 1 of quarterfinal where Magnus Carlsen emerged victorious against Anish with a score of 2.5 to 1.5, whereas Anish in the game 1 had really good winning chances, but Magnus escaped out with a good defensive draw. In the second match, Aronian, after losing the first game, won the match with a score of 2.5 to 1.5, and Wesley So was completely dominated by Temur Rajabo with a huge score of 2.5 to 0.5. MVL also managed to come out victorious against Hikaru Nakamura with a score of 2.5 to 1.5. But it's not yet over, guys. These losers are not yet knocked out. Today, there will be another rapid section with 4 games played in each match. If the loser of yesterday's match wins today's match and he comes back, then there will be a tie and the players move on to the blitz section. So it's going to be extremely exciting. I have selected 2 interesting games from yesterday which we are going to analyze in this video. So without wasting any further time, let us get started. Our first game was played between Aronian and Nepomniachtchi. This was the 4th game of the match and the score was 1.5 each. The winner of this game would emerge as the winner of this whole match. Nepomniachtchi started with e4, to which Aronian responded with e5. They went into the Geico piano setup, bishop c4, bishop c5, c3, knight f6, d3. This is called as the closed Geico piano, not going for the d4 open Geico piano setup. Okay, castles, fairly orthodox moves. Castles, d6 was played, h3, rook e8, knight bd2, bishop e6. In these lines, black generally goes bishop e6 and this knight is transferred to g6, which you will see in the game. So white decided to create something on the queen side. He played b4. Okay, bishop stepped back. White looks slightly better, definitely. Okay, he went for a4. He wants to trap this bishop. So obviously black plays a6, giving this square for the bishop. White took bishop into e6, rook into e6. Okay, white played queen c2, slowly improving his position. And here comes the novelty of this game. He played d5, hitting in the center. After d5, white went for bishop b2, knight h5. What's the point of this knight h5 move? He wants to go to f4, create something on the king's side. Maybe this rook can swap itself to the king side on the g file or the h file. So after knight h5, white went for b5, attacking the knight. Knight came back to e7. Definitely this knight can also join the attack on the king side. c4. Now here, black decided to release the pressure from the center. He could have played the move like d4, but he doesn't really want to block his own bishop. So he decided to take d into e4. Knight into e4. He wants to play c5. Supporting c5, he wants to play c5, worsening the bishop and completely blocking it. Okay, black played c6. Obviously, black wants to come from c7 if at all white decides to trouble this bishop on b6. So white went for knight into e5. His pawn was hanging right from the moment where white played c4. But here it was a forcing move. White had to recapture. Now white was actually threatening to take this, but at the same time, this threat was also present in the game. So black decided to play c6, and if white takes knight into e5, black's idea was to play for kingside attack with some compensation. But I feel white looks slightly better here. He's a pawn up. Black has definitely a few chances, but nothing much. After knight g6, d4 was played. Knight g2 f4. This looks like very good for white if white manages to control this kingside aggression of black's pieces. But the point is, in rapid, when you don't have much time to calculate, these kind of positions are fairly simpler to play from the attacking side rather than the defensive side. Knight f3, knight h4 was played, trying to exchange the defender on the king side. Knight into h4, queen into h4 was played. White played knight g3, which is a really good move, keeping a knight in front of this g file, keeping things under control, also eyeing for the f5 square if needed. And things look solid for white, and also white is a pawn up. What went wrong for Nepomniachtchi? Black simply improved his rook to e8, b into c6, b into c6 played. Bishop came to c3. The idea behind this move, bishop c3, is he also wants to open the b file for his rooks, where he can create some counterplay. Black went for h5, trying to get h4 at the right moment. White played rook ab1, attacking the bishop. Bishop had to step back on this diagonal. Anyway, this diagonal was blocked because of the d4 pawn. After bishop c7, white went rook b7. This is the move which did cost Nepomniachtchi the game. I would invite you to pause here and find what Aronian played in the game. Aronian played knight takes h3, g into h3, bishop into g3, wrecking open this king. If white plays f into g3, then there is queen into g3. He has to play queen g2, queen into c3, winning the piece back which black had earlier sacrificed. And this king is weak, rook g6 is coming. Also, black is a pawn up now and looks like a clearly winning position for black. If white tries taking the f7 pawn, queen into d4 check, king goes to h2 or h1, doesn't matter, there is rook e2. This g7 point is also guarded safely. Black has nothing to worry. King is absolutely weak. Okay, so here, after bishop into g3, white decided to slightly complicate the matters. He already knew that he has blundered and he's going to lose the game. So he tried for this d5. With d5, there came another sacrifice, queen into h3. He cannot take this because queen h2 is a mate. So he had to take f into g3. But now comes rook e2. As the second rank is opened, black steps on the e2 square and threatens the mate as well as attacks the queen. And white had to resign at this point. With this game, Aronian won with the score 2.5 to 1.5, and Nepomniachtchi had lost the match. But no worries, he will get another shot today. Let us see how these players handle the situation today in the knockout phase, day 2. The next game that we are going to see was played between Magnus Carlsen and Anish. This was the fourth game of their match. I want to start from this position where Magnus played a very committal move and it's highly instructive. Magnus played knight e7. Here, what does this move do? Obviously, black wants to get the knight to the king side, but at the same time, this knight is also releasing the pressure over the d4 square. So white can straight away play d4. In Geico piano, this move is considered to be worse because it abandons the center and white has good center control and good amount of space. But black had planned something else. Here, black played bishop a7, sacrificing the pawn on e5. He played knight g4 after d into e5, not recapturing this pawn but attacking f2. White decided to play bishop e3. Magnus decided to play knight into e. This is the first novelty in this game. There was a game played here with the move knight into e5. Yakovenko was white and Peter Swidler was black. Okay, let's go back to Magnus's game. Knight into e3 was played, d into e5. White went for knight into e5, asking the question, what's your idea? I have won a pawn, that to a central pawn. Black comes out with knight g6. White decided to take knight into g6. F into g6 was played, and white happily went into the endgame. Rook e2 was played next. Here comes another surprising move which black decided to play. You can pause and find for yourself what would you do if you were black here. Bishop into e3 was played. This was the differentiating factor which was giving black enough compensation because white did not have the dark square bishop. But black decides to give up that bishop for this knight on e3 for two important aspects. Either white has to go for this doubled pawn structure or white has to allow this rook d2 move. After which black gets enough activity if white plays this Then there is this. Now, what black is threatening is rook into e2, followed by rook d2. Here, white had a very good move up his sleeve, but I think it was quite difficult to find it over the board with so less time on the clock. White had to play king f1 here. Idea is if rook into e2, king into e2 controls the rook d2 penetration. But he did not find it and he felt a bit uncomfortable. He decided to play f into e3. After which, this is a permanent weakness. Okay, these are passed pawns, but they can easily be blockaded. Now comes one of the best moves of yesterday, which I am a big fan of. I would invite you to pause and think for yourself. What would you do here as black? Black played the move king f7. If you see in the game, the king managed to reach this e5 square, after which white was completely dominated. His pieces had no squares at all. So after king f7, bishop a4, king came to e7, opening up the f file for the rook. h3, bishop to c4, rook went to c2. He needs to control the d2 square. Because here, black would just take, then rook d2 penetration, winning the 7th rank pawn. So rook d3, attacking the e3 pawn, white had to play rook e1. Slowly, the king goes the e5 spot. Not king e6 here. If you play king e6, white would immediately pounce on this bishop b3 move, asking for a trade to release the pressure from his position. Bishop b3 was played. Obviously, black doesn't want to exchange pieces. He steps back, bishop a6, rook cc1, king e5. Now, once the king reaches e5, it's like a bind. White is not going anywhere with his pawns on the e file. Rook c d1, offering trade, obviously doubling up the rooks on the d file. Rook into d3, bishop into d3, king f2, rook d6, bishop d1, bishop c4. If you look at white's pieces, they have very less scope. b3. Now comes another interesting move. Rook d2 check, forcing king g3 first and then stepping back to e6. White can play rook f1 here, which he did in the game. Rook into a2. After bishop g4, black simply takes the b3 pawn, and this pawn is way too dangerous. There's no way white can easily stop it. Rook f8, king into e4, rook c8, king into e3, rook into c7, bishop d5, guarding this pawn, bishop f3, bishop into f3, g into f3, and they ended up into the rook endgame, bishop g4, rook b2, rook into g7, rook b6, c4. Now black is up a pawn with an active king. This is absolutely winning endgame for black. King d4, rook c7, a4, c5, rook behind the passed pawn. Typical rook endgame technique. If you can achieve this in rook endgames, opponent's rook is going to be forced to go to a passive spot in front of the pawn, and then you can use your king to create more play. Like you'll see in the game, rook into b7, king into c5, rook c7, king b6, rook c1 had to be played, a3, h4, a2, rook a1, and look at this rook, quite passive. Rook a4, precise technique, cutting off this king. f4 was played, h5, again controlling this point, king f3, king c5, king e3, king d5, king f3, king e6, and at this point, Anish decided to resign the game because there is a simple plan. Like you cannot move the rook, you can give a check, but after king f5, if you decide to give this check, then king f6, and you cannot stop this. You go back, there is a1 queen, rook into a1, rook into a1, black is win. And if you decide to go back, then there is rook a3 check. King has to step back. You can grab this pawn. This pawn is also hanging, and these two connected passed pawns are going to win you the game. With this game, Carlsen also managed to win with a score of 2.5 to 1.5. But no worries, Anish Giri at the same time has another shot today. If you have found this video instructive, do like the video, subscribe to our channel, and also do not forget to press the bell icon so that you can get notified as soon as we come up with a new instructive video. Thanks a lot, guys.